Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sunset TV. And in this episode, we are going to look at something extremely current, news-making, as well as path-breaking. Because India has changed the entire approach to having exhibitions of defense platforms, the Defexpo. And this year, most recently, the Defexpo held in Gujarat, where the Prime Minister and the Raksha Mantri were both there, has shown very clearly the desire for India to move rapidly in the field of defense production and exports with Aatmanirbharta. And for the first time perhaps, only companies that had manufactured products in India or foreign OEMs with India partnerships were allowed to take part at the exhibitions. And this raises some questions about how India's acquisition process is going to pan out from here. To understand all that, we have with us the distinguished Dr. Selvamurthy, who was earlier chairman and DG of DRDO and is now chairman of the Amity University's campuses in Chhattisgarh, an academic, intellectual and scientist, and very informed about defense. We have with us also somebody who I hold in very high regard, Lieutenant General Subrata Saha, former Deputy Chief of the Army, former GOC 15 Corps in Kashmir. And in the context of this such discussion, the founding chairman and DG of SIDM, the Society of Indian Defence Manufacturers, and therefore has an understanding of the challenges Indian defense manufacturing has been facing and could we overcome that. But more importantly, we have with us Mr. S.P. Shukla, who is the chairman of Mahindra Defense and Aerospace Systems and Mahindra Systems, who is joining us because of his various commitments through a Zoom link. So I'm going to go straight to him first and ask him the first one or two questions before I go on to my distinguished panelists here. So, Mr. Shukla, Mahindra is a leader in defense manufacturing, defense aerospace, and has been there for long. It's in a variety of industrial platforms. How do you see the changes being pushed through by the government panning out in a way to address the concerns that people in the industry like you have been bringing out for years, particularly getting the private sector to enter the defense space?
Very insightful question, Maroof. I will try to answer it in three parts. One, what has been concerned, and two, what government has done to address it. Originally, the concern was that sector was considered a domain or preserve of public sector undertakings. For some reason, impression had gathered in first 50, 60 years of independence that defense production somehow should only be in public sector. Unlike the situation you see in Western world, US or UK or France, where defense companies are all in private sector. Second, some 10, 15 years ago, when it was opened up for private sector, the playing field was still not level. The policies were such that if two companies, one in private sector and one in public sector, wanted to do the same thing, public sector company had certain inherent advantages in entire process from the time RFI, RFPs were formulated till the time selection was made, or sometimes simply it was nomination, even though there was capability in the private sector. What has happened? First, I will share the outcomes so that one can see that changes are not cosmetic, outcomes are real. Not long ago, our 50% of defense procurement was coming from imports and 50% was made in India. Now, it is 65% made in India and 35% import. So from 1:1, it has already changed to 1:2. That's one great change, which is clearly visible. Second part is even more important to understand. I had actually made request myself as industry body head that we should monitor one more parameter. Within domestic procurement, what is the share of private sector? And our ministry and concerned departments should monitor this statistics also. It was very graciously agreed by the Raksha Mantri, and data is being collected now for last 3 years. How has it moved? Private sector within domestic procurement was only 10 to 12% few years ago. It has reached almost 25% now. The goal is to take it slowly to 50%, which means both private sector and public sector are equal partner in producing equipment for the defense of the nation.
Saha, sir, I want you to explain this term that has come to be from time to time, that defense industrial complex is now the sunrise sector. What is so sunrise about it? What wasn't the case earlier? What leads us to get this extra sense of enthusiasm about the defense industrial sector?
Okay, so first, Maroof, thank you for having me on your show. Let me get back to the root question from where you started. What is it that changed in the Defexpo? And you brought out the change. As deputy chief, I went around literally every Saturday, Sunday to different academic industrial hubs with one simple line: we will win India's wars with Indian solutions with your collaboration. So that was my coinage, and we had gone out. Today, when I see what has happened in Defexpo in Gandhinagar, that dream seems to be coming true. 2-3 things are playing into it. First, if you see the pace at which the armed forces of the country under the leadership of the defense minister are publishing their positive indigenization lists. The 4th positive indigenization list was announced during Defexpo Gandhinagar. Today, the figure of these items are 411. From August 19 to October 2022, in 3 years and few months, we have achieved a list of 411. Second point is, the Defexpo that took place in Chennai in 2018 shifted it from the previous years from a place to display to put out India as a domestic manufacturing hub. Now we see between Chennai, Lucknow and Gandhinagar, it has moved one step forward to start promoting India not only for its domestic requirements, but also as an export hub for the future. So this is a major shift. And in terms of figures, if you see, around 2014-15, our defense export was around approximately 1900 crores. Today, that has gone up to approximately 8,500 crores. It is a 4.5 times, multiplication. And let me tell you, the defense production and export promotion policy clearly stipulates the target as 35,000 crores by 2025. We have to move very fast. So therefore, a decision like this by the government that we will allow only those FOEMs, foreign original equipment manufacturers, who have either joint ventures or subsidiaries in India to set up stall. It is a big message that is going out. And if you see the way, how nicely they have clubbed, inviting the defense ministers from various African countries into the Gandhinagar. This happened in Lucknow. This has been repeated this time. Not only that, the number of senior armed forces people that have come, like the Argentinian CDS, a whole lot of countries were there moving around. The HL showed him the Tejas, which he was quite fascinated by. All of us have seen that. They saw the LCH. Similarly, there was a delegation from UK. There was a delegation from everywhere trying to see how they can pitch in. I mean, like, you see how people have changed. Take the case of UK, for example. They got the chief of their Defense Export and Security Agency to come and see and understand. I spoke to him myself, Major General Mark Goldsack. He came here to understand what are the changes that India is wanting for them to be relevant and contributing to India's Make in India. So I think we are achieving a significant change in the way we are taking a look at the sunrise industry that you're talking about.
No doubt, because I think this was a message that was waiting to be given, and this was a message that needed to be explained to all those who queue up and express frustration when they don't get mother of all deals, which has been the story for the last decade or so, especially for the aircrafts. Dr. Selvamurthy, You have been with DRDO. You've been at the leading apex level of taking decisions on production of various items. Now, how does the involvement of foreign OEMs in projects and them encroaching on what was the holy space that only you and your organizations occupied, how does that reflect? Is there going to be, obviously there will be some friction, but is that going to work in India's favor, or will there be turf wars that will be so deep that we will miss the timelines that we had set out for ourselves?
Thank you, Mr. Raza. First of all, the people of India should be very happy that today we have the ecosystem, total ecosystem for self-reliance in defense technologies, and also we have started exporting, which is going to grow exponentially. And when you look at this specific question which you asked for, the DRDO has been the hub of, the technology hub of the defense equipments and technologies. But then the canvas is so wide that you can't do everything yourself. So even in the system which we made, we initially had to depend on some of the technologies coming from outside, getting incorporated into that. Be it a tank or an aircraft or a radar. So we learned from that. But today we have built that tacit knowledge, the technology prowessness to manufacture them. So today the capability, the scenario has changed today. But still, if you look at Embraer aircraft, I'll take an example, that only airframe is made in that country, Brazil. And then the whole avionics, engine, everything comes from outside. So there is no country which makes everything in their own. So they do depend. If you look at the global picture, any system or system of systems are made, you have components, devices, subsystems coming from other sectors, other countries. So this effort, OEM partnering with Indian institutions and Indian manufacturing hub, I think it's a welcome decision. I would not feel threatened by this. It's going to bring in synergy. Where there's a technology gap or a knowledge gap or a manufacturing lacunae, that can be filled by this partnership and synergy coming from the OEM. So I would say that this is a welcome decision because it's a globalized world today. And the countries are willing to partner because the whole world is looking towards Indian capability in defense sector, which is rising, as you said, sunrise sector. And what you need people, the scientists, technologists who can conceptualize, design, develop, evaluate, manufacture, support. So all this today the country is producing now. Now we have started MTech in defense technology, BTech, MTech integrated defense technology in Amity University and a few other universities. So this will provide the manpower who will conceive quantum technologies, AI application in defense, machine learning, deep learning, virtual reality, augmented reality. Because if you have to become a leader, you must have in niche areas a leadership role. It should be the first time India is doing. So this is where India should focus and then bring in synergy. And where you don't have the capability today, build that partnership with that country who is willing to do it on a partnership mode.
And also partnership within the local industrial giants of the country.
Exactly.
I mean, bringing in countries is one thing. The other thing is, I'm a great believer in the capabilities of our own companies.
Absolutely.
The Mahindras, the Tata Advanced Systems, L&T, Bharat Forge, they were all there at the Defexpo. I go back to Mr. Shukla. Mr. Shukla, you see, there is a desire to enhance R&D. And to that effect, the government has laid out a 300 crore grant for R&D to give us the kind of 100 IDEX winners for equipment-related research. Now, my simple question is, I was given to understand, and if we just take a glance at the US defense budget, their R&D expenses is more than our defense budget because they put in a lot of money in R&D. So how good is this 300 crore going to work towards R&D for you all, and how much of more support is expected by the private industry to come up with state-of-the-art equipment so that our dependency on foreign research and produced goods even decreases further.
You make a very, very important point. My compliments to you to get to the core of the issue. US alone has a defense budget which is half the defense budget of the whole world. In making a comparison with US defense budget and therefore R&D budget within the US budget will perhaps not be relevant. Size of the economies are vastly different. If we talk only in the Indian context, I agree with you, 300 crore is not a large amount of money. If we were to work on any one of the projects under either IDDM or Make One, the funding changes. Under Make One, 70% of the funding comes from the government. But in case of IDDM, it is supported by the industry itself. Make Two, it is supported by the industry itself. And these are the three major programs under which defense procurement is envisaged in future. So other than Make One, government funding will be rather limited in every other project. This amount is envisaged also to support startups and R&D organizations within the country, within the defense sector. So my feeling is, under the new scheme which came where funding up to 10 crore is allowed, perhaps we will have 15-20 good startups or R&D units which will be able to take some projects every year, and rest will be done by private sector on their own initiative. From the total funding available, that is how it looks like. What is important is acceleration of domestic industry within the country so that it will generate its own resources. 25% of the 65% of the total budget is a small business still. As it grows, the margins of profits generated by the industry will become self-sufficient to sponsor more research. That is all I can say, and that is the expectation on which we are building our plans and future business cases.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've laid out your cards very clearly. General Saha, I was quite intrigued to note that India remains primarily focused in promoting non-lethal defense exports. So while there is talk about defense exports, those pieces of equipment that are non-aggressive but perhaps passive or defensive in nature, whether these are anti-drone measures, these are uniform items, etc., two issues come up. One is this to give comfort to the P5 countries who are still in the field of giving all sorts of aggressive weapon systems all over the world, and therefore leads them to want wars so that more of those weapon systems can be bought and they can make more profits. Without mincing my words, I can see the case of Russia, America in Ukraine. Second linked aspect is that India's export systems and equipment that we export is backed by a proven battlefield experience. So we can tell people that what we are selling you, our troops use it. So there is a captive market for it in India, and therefore these are tried and trusted and you can go for it. You brought up the point about some 51 odd African countries coming here and 11 odd CDS equivalents coming here for the Defexpo. So has all this worked in our favor?
Okay, Maroof, if you permit, let me give you some figures, with reference to your previous question. Our defense R&D budget in the current financial year is 21,330 crores. It is 0.8% of the GDP. So we should not think that it is anywhere less. The figure of 300 crores that you mentioned is only for the IDEX program, which is meant for startups. It is not meant for the larger industries.
Okay.
So out of this 21,330 crores, if you see the budget of 2022, for the first time, the government of India has announced that 25% of this R&D budget, defense R&D budget, will be earmarked for the private sector. So to begin with, it is meant to support Make One programs. Make One, as you know, was withheld for a while. We just heard some views on that. So therefore, the actual investment is far more. Now, as far as, to say that India is only looking at exporting non-lethal weapons, I do not agree with that statement entirely. Why? Because if you see the kind of interest which people are having in the BrahMos, for example, okay, and I think we have made some substantial progress with regard to BrahMos. Then likewise, I spoke about the Tejas, and then even in the defense, line of credit that we have, export line of credit, we are supplying even, weapons which are being manufactured by some of our public sector units and all. So it is not as if it is only non-lethal weapons. The scope is only expanding. And here I think I must also highlight, from being a top weapons import country, now we have entered the list of first 25 defense export companies. So therefore, I see the scope only expanding as we go into the future. Now, with respect to that point which you made, it is a very interesting point, because I'm definitely conscious of so many countries who say that if something has been inducted into the Indian Armed Forces, it has gone through a very stringent trial process. So they are quite happy to, make the trial much easier when you want to send it to them. And this is a reflection that comes from several countries across the world who are quite happy to accept something that India, which has been inducted into the armed forces. So therefore, if you see in their QRs, it states very categorically that it must have been inducted into India's armed forces, then we will take it. So to find a way around that, the Government of India, Ministry of Defense, about 4 years back, took out a process by saying that fine, if something has gone through the trials, but could not make it because it was not the lowest, it was not L1, even if it is L2, if it has gone through the trials, Ministry of Defense was ready to certify to a potentially importing country from India that we will give a certificate that this had passed the trials in India, but because of the commercial bid, it was not accepted. So therefore, there is a fair amount of recognition and acknowledgement of the stringent trials that our equipment manufactured by both public and private sector has to undergo in order to get inducted.
Okay, so that's a very comprehensive clarification. I was making this point about, pushing passive equipment, passive warfare equipment based on material that has been listed in the India's export brochures.
See, you're making again a very valid point, Maroof, because today if you see, we saw it in the Defexpo here, there is a lot of interest which we are seeing in the industry to contribute to non-kinetic warfare. And I think that's a major, like if you went to the India pavilion, which was not necessarily in terms of stalls of X industry or Y industry, but it generally demonstrated the kind of capabilities that India has come up with. Really speaking, it was not too much of kinetic, but a whole lot of non-kinetic capability, as we were talking about VR, AR and so on. That was all on display. So it is just as well that India is taking advantage of its good standing that it has in IT and IT-enabled services to make a mark over here in as far as the defense domain is also concerned via the non-kinetic route that you're talking about. Then likewise, if you see, there were 10 items that were identified during the Defexpo in which the Ministry of Defense has said that these are those, call it allied or associated sectors like semiconductors, chips and so on, that we are going to promote with, performance-linked incentives and so on, production-linked incentives and so on, and encouraging them. Even if you see drone, it has been ultimately clubbed with the Drone Shakti program, which is not only to do with defense, but very much with agriculture and several other sectors.
Yeah, so the point is well registered, and also briefly, the fact is that, you see, warfare, it's a myth to me that warfare can only be won by using kinetic and aggressive platforms. There are many other factors that go into it, and let's not forget the long tail that the military has everywhere, where the logistic support, if it's not there adequate, I mean, beyond the point the troops cannot sustain themselves. But Dr. Selvamurthy, last question to you, tight on time, but I have never understood, and I'll be very honest to admit it on television, what these defense industrial corridors are about. There was a corridor that was set up after the Defense Expo in Chennai and the Southern Indian Corridor. There's a similar corridor that was set up in UP after the Defense Expo there. So, what does it do for the business of defense industrial complex in India?
The government of India is now planning to make India as the manufacturing hub for defense systems.
That we know.
Yeah. So towards that direction, this is yet another effort to create the two defense manufacturing hub, which will be one in UP, the other one in Tamil Nadu. What they will be doing is, first they will acquire huge land to establish. Then if a L&T, Tata's, Mahindra, Godrej, or startups, MSME, they want to establish a facility, that space can be given to them. And it'll be like a special economic zone where you would put those and special facilities will be provided. And this will motivate people to invest and establish facilities in defense corridors. So this will become a manufacturing hub. They have rightly chosen one in the northern part, one in the southern part. The country has, this will be the first to start with. But then over a period of time, you will have many more coming, the defense corridors coming in. So the main purpose is to create the manufacturing facility, because make in India, make for world, make for the world. So if it has to happen, you need that large base. Today, whatever we have is sufficient perhaps to meet some of our own requirements. But once you are looking at export as a very major initiative from India for the defense, so then we need to have a broad base, the manufacturing facilities. That will come over there, including startups. Some of them will have facilities for startups there. And special facilities in a subsidized way will also be provided for the defense manufacturing.
So we are completely running out of time. But Mr. Shukla, I'm told you want to make some last remarks, but you've got a minute because I just don't have time.
I wanted to only add to the point on industrial corridors. It brings around us ecosystem at one place. Today we have an ecosystem, but it's fragmented. If you want to make a light tank in Faridabad assembly unit, machining is happening out of Pune, casting may be happening somewhere else. Manpower comes together at one place in a corridor. It is like olden days we had sarees being made in Banaras or brassware in Moradabad. You have karigars, you have raw material suppliers, buyer of your product, credit suppliers, all at one place.
Okay, so that's a very important point. We need to close the show due to paucity of time. But I think all three of you have brought brilliant insights into the subject. I am that much more better educated about what our defense expos and our defense initiatives is now veering onto. And I think in a few years down the line, as General Saha has expressed very strong optimism, I think the whole texture of what will be made in India and what will be made for the world in India is going to change. But until then, thanks for your inputs and thanks for watching. Goodbye.